Hello, my name is Delia and welcome back to my channel. Today I will take a break from my summer reading project and do a more casual video where I talk about 7 of my favorite books, pieces of writing of all time that first I really enjoyed, and secondly I think they impacted my life in some way. Just a bit of update with my summer reading project. Since my last video, I managed to read both Orlando by Virginia Woolf and Meridian by Alice Walker, and I have them here as proof. You see they have sticky notes on them, so they were read. But I decided I want to do more than just a review and analysis with these novels. I also wanted to delve into the other works of the authors and the authors themselves, and kind of their impact on literature, because they are both women and they tackle themes of feminism in their novels. So I wanted to do videos that are a bit more complex with these novels, and I realized it will take me a little bit longer than if I were just to do a review and analysis. That's the reason why today's video will be a bit more casual. I hope you'll still enjoy it. If you're watching for my summer reading project, don't worry, that's still ongoing. But I thought it would also be nice to kind of present myself from a literary point of view, by telling you about my favorite pieces of writing, because there are 6 novels and one play. It's not a round number. I chose 7, although 7 is a magical number, so maybe there was something going going in my mind when I made this list. And because I wanted this video to be a bit more entertaining for me, I don't know necessarily for you, I'll also read some one-star reviews for these pieces of writing, which I think it will be pretty funny, and maybe we'll learn something new. You'll see that these are classic novels that are very appreciated all around the world, and I do admire people who leave one-star reviews for these novels, because I don't have enough confidence in me. If I know a novel is considered a masterpiece, I will do my best to understand why and not to critique it. Now, I'm not saying this is a good thing. Quite contrary, I think it's a bad thing, because it's important for us to criticize anything, no matter how great it might be. Nothing is perfect. Without further ado, I don't have all of the books with me because some of them are at my parents' house and in their bookshelf. But I have 3 of them, and for the others, I'll put a picture of the cover so you have something to look at. So without further ado, let's get into my top 7 books that changed my life. Before I start, these books are in no particular order, so just because the book is the first doesn't mean that is the one that I like the least or the one that I like the most. I don't have a hierarchy for them. I'll just present them in the order that I felt like. First book is Mrs. Dalloway by Virginia Woolf. I've mentioned that I read Orlando and I rediscovered my love for the author, but Mrs. Dalloway was the first novel that I've read completely from her. My first experience was with Virginia Woolf. In my last year of high school, I attempted to read To the Lighthouse without knowing what I'm getting myself into, and I didn't like it. It was confusing for me, it seemed difficult to understand, so I just stopped reading after like 10 pages. But Mrs. Dalloway we had to read for one of my classes in my bachelor degree. So I was a bit scared going into it because I had that previous experience. But since it was something for university, I had this extra motivation to read it and to go through with it. And I'm happy I did. Like I said in my first video, you really need to go in with the right expectations, and you need to stick to the confusion, because things will start to clear up at some point. Yes, you will be confused, although that's not necessarily true with Orlando, I must say. With Orlando, you don't have this back and forth, this constant switching between past and present and characters, and you don't know exactly whose voice you're hearing. I think Orlando would be a good way to start with Virginia Woolf, but Mrs. Dalloway was a good start for me, as long as you don't give up and you power through the first 10 or 20 pages, then things will start make sense. Let me tell you some words about the book. So from what I remember, I've read this a few years back, so I might not remember things very accurately, but this book revolves around like you'd imagine, Mrs. Dalloway. And throughout, you basically get one day in her life and in the life of the characters. You jump from the consciousness of one character to another. And at first, you have these all these characters that seem like they are separate. But then at the end, when the party takes place and everybody comes together at the party, all the pieces also come together for the reader, and you see how all the characters that were presented and all the voices that you got to read throughout the novel, they all come together and they kind of make sense. It's a pretty sad book, I will say, although you'll see that I do enjoy sad books. Generally, that's my cup of tea. It's a pretty sad book, but it tackles themes of isolation, loneliness, depression in a very poetic way, and not in a way that makes you feel worse, but in a way that makes you feel seen, if that makes sense. I do highly encourage you to read Virginia Woolf, with the risk of sounding maybe a bit sexist. I think you can feel in her voice that she's a woman. So maybe if you're a guy and you enjoyed this, let me know. There is a closeness I feel to her literature that I don't feel with male writers. I don't know if this makes sense. Maybe I'm just imagining it. Now, rambling aside, let's read some one-star reviews about Mrs. Dalloway. And I have my laptop here, so you'll see me looking down to read the reviews. So first review says, "Torturous, just buy the fucking flowers, Mrs. Dalloway." That's pretty pretty funny. I think she does buy the flowers, doesn't she? The first line is, "Mrs. Dalloway says she'd buy the flower herself." So you cannot tell from the first page if she actually buys the flowers, but obviously that's not the point of the novel. They have DNF, so they didn't read it, and that's what I'm talking about. If you just stop at the first page, yes, it's torturous, it's awful, and you feel like you don't understand anything, but you need to read the whole of it, because if you just read the first page, it's like you probably I'll sound very pretentious, but please bear with me. If you've ever been to an art gallery and seen a picture by Monet, you know that if you stand very close to the painting and you just watch a little square of the painting, it looks like scribbles. It doesn't make sense. You're like, what am I looking at? It's just random colors thrown on the canvas. So you need to take a step back and look at the full painting to get what he wanted to paint. And Virginia's writing, I think, is very impressionistic, you could say, because yes, if you just read of the first page, you feel like she just throws things at the page without making sense, but you need to read the full novel in order to get the full picture. For me, that moment when you take a step back, meaning you read the novel, you take a step back and you get to see the full picture, it's amazing, and it's definitely worth powering through the first few pages of confusion. On to the next review, that says, "I could not finish this chapterless book. It's so hard to follow. You'd be reading it and then wondering if you wash the dishes or be wondering about your ex-girlfriend or whatever. Anyway, the beautiful style of writing doesn't make up for the lack of plot. Maybe I'll try to read it again someday." I wouldn't say that it lacks the plot, but definitely the plot takes a step back. It's more about the feelings and the experience of the people whose lives intersect randomly in one random day. And that is why I say you need to go in with the right expectations, because it's very different from a traditional novel. You won't get a story with beginning and end, not necessarily, but again, from my point of view, it's completely worth it. To the part where wondering about your ex-girlfriend or whatever, I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing about the book. And the thing with Virginia Woolf, I heard more people say, and I do agree, that sometimes her writing is kind of like poetry. So you cannot just read it like you would read a plot-driven book. You just go on with it. Sometimes, yes, you read a page or you read a paragraph and you have to stop. Maybe it reminds you of something, or it wakes some feelings in you. So that's not necessarily a bad thing. It seems, oh, it's a short book, I'll just read it quickly. Well, not necessarily. It can take a long time if you want to really take in all of the poetry of Virginia Woolf's writing. Let's see the next review. I felt like I was reading this with someone else's prescription glasses. Everything was so scattered and unfocused. And I think this is not necessarily a bad review because it describes the experience pretty well, and I think it can be an amazing experience as long as you know that that's what you're going to get. And I cannot stop thinking about Monet. I think it's a great way to compare these two artists because they kind of do the same thing but with different mediums. You do need kind of to take an unfocused look, but that's not a bad thing. I find this review quite poetic. I'm sorry that you didn't enjoy the novel. On to the next book that is one of my favorites, and that is De Profundis. I'm not sure. In my mother tongue, you would pronounce it De Profundis, by Oscar Wilde. So this is not a novel. This is a letter that Wilde wrote in prison for his lover, whose name was Lord Alfred Douglas. I first read it in Romanian and then I reread it in English. And this was a book that I read when I was going through quite a difficult time in my life. I don't want to get too much into detail, but obviously Oscar Wilde himself was going through an awful time. I don't want to compare my experience to his experience in Victorian English prisons. It was one of those novels that made me feel seen and helped me put a name to my feelings. It's his letter to his lover. It's absolutely heart wrenching. It's very beautiful. He talks about love in a very beautiful way, but it's also very sad because he also talks about how his lover practically abandoned him when he needed him the most. It has some very beautiful passages about love, and it has interesting passages about Oscar Wilde's life. So let's get into some one-star reviews and see what people who didn't like this had to say about it. First person says, unfortunately, I didn't finish this one. Love Wilde, but the prison letter was full of blame, unfairness, and casting himself as a victim. This was originally meant for boys and not for others to read and enjoy. I do agree with this to some extent. Unfairness, I don't know. This is debatable. You know, in a conflict, there's never one person that's right or one person that's wrong. We definitely get Wilde's perspective. Of course, he throws a lot of blame onto his lover. I think some of it is understandable. You need to think about the context, especially since this was not a piece of writing written for the public. So I think in this case it's good to take into account the context more than it would be for other pieces of writing. Next review says, this is like a long breakup text from a very self-centered person. It really annoyed me. I don't fully disagree. I do think Oscar Wilde was a little bit self-centered, but on the other hand, I do think he was very talented as a writer. So to some degree, there was a reason why he was so self-centered. If you leave aside those parts where he praises his talent and blames his lover for not being able to reach the full potential of his talent, I think that there is true literary value in his writing. I wish I could say more about it to defend this text, but to be completely honest, it's been a long time since I read it and I don't remember very much of it. And when I read the English version, I didn't make any annotations in order to be able to go back to any fragments that I could read in order to convince you. It does have passages that are quite self-centered. He does throw the blame onto his lover. On the other hand, he was in prison. He was not treated very well, and he was denied access to his family. So he was suffering at the same time, and I think it's worth overlooking all the self-centeredness and see what's really central in this. Or maybe it was just that I read it at the right time. Either way, I still like it. The next piece of writing is not a novel, but it's a play, and that's Hamlet by Shakespeare. Hamlet was another piece of writing that I had to read for my bachelor degree. I had a similar experience with Hamlet as I did with Mrs. Dalloway, in that I was quite scared of it in the beginning, and that's why I didn't read it from the get-go, but I first watched a play of it. Because obviously Hamlet is a play, Shakespeare wrote plays, so they were meant to be seen on stage. And I think if you want to get into Hamlet and you want to read it, I think it's worth seeing the play first, and then reading the text. There's definitely a lot to get out of when you just read the text, because his writing is very complex. But I think it's a good idea to first watch the play and then read the text. The version I watched was the one with Benedict Cumberbatch. I think it's from 2015. The reason why I like this and I feel like I resonated with Hamlet was because of Hamlet's feelings for his father. There is a part, I'm not going to recite it because I don't remember the words exactly, but there is a part right at the beginning when everybody is happy about the wedding between the new king and Hamlet's mother. And Hamlet has this moment when he thinks, well, it's been so little time since my father died, and everybody just seems to have moved on. And I read this close to when my grandfather passed away, and I really empathized with that feeling. And not only that, there are other parts of the play that I really enjoyed, but that is what really captivated me and made me pay very close attention. And that's why this play is close to my heart. But again, if you want to get into Shakespeare and you're too scared of it, definitely watch a play first. You can start with Midsummer Night's Dream. That's a bit easier to understand and it's funny. Let's get into some one-star reviews for Hamlet. First review says, men are so dramatic for no reason. Well, Hamlet is dramatic for a reason, and yes, I think if you just read Hamlet as, oh, this is the problem of a prince, and I cannot relate to that, it's quite a superficial way to look at it, and you'll definitely lose a lot of value from the play, because it's worth just peeling back that layer of, oh, this is just a problem of royalty, and looking at Hamlet as a person trying to understand the impossible position he finds himself in. And to be fair, women are also dramatic. Let's not be sexist in our critics. Next review. This is a spoiler. The spoiler alert. Hamlet was so whiny. The best part was when everybody kills each other at the end. Yes, he is, but on the other hand, I think it's understandable. First, his father is killed. Then he finds out that his uncle killed his father to take the throne. Hamlet doesn't want to be king. I think that's something that maybe this person didn't get. Hamlet doesn't want to be king. He is very much, and that's another reason that I related to it. He is very much an intellectual. He wants to go to university and just study, but because of the situation in his country, he has to come back and take his father's place and avenge his father's death. So all the things he has to do, he doesn't want to, but he finds himself in this impossible position. He has a reason for being whiny. And I think, maybe I'm biased, but Shakespeare is very good at being whiny, and aren't we all whiny at the end of the day? So let's enjoy and empathize with each other's whininess, if that's a word. This is funny. I think it misses the point of the play, but it's funny. So it says, would not recommend for any revenge killing, indecisive, zero initiative, way too slow. Any taxi driver could have gotten the job done in 20 seconds in broad daylight by accident. Do not recommend neither Hamlet as a hitman nor taxi drivers as drivers. Okay. Yes, Hamlet is indecisive, but that's the whole point. That's what basically kickstarts the play, because if he would have been decisive and he would have killed his father, then we wouldn't have had this conflict and his whole soliloquy with to be or not to be, where he contemplates killing himself because he feels overwhelmed by this impossible choice he has to make, because he cannot do what he wants to do, which is to go to university and study. He feels like he cannot kill his uncle and avenge his father. So that's the idea. He is meant to be indecisive, but very fine. This review just says mid. Agree to disagree. Next review says, listening to Drake's entire discography would have been more enjoyable than reading this flop. If you get more out of Drake's discography than Hamlet, all the power to you. You don't have to read Shakespeare. Next novel I want to talk about is called Bless Me Ultima by Rodolfo Anaya, if I'm not mistaken. I'll correct myself if I am. So this is another book that I had to read, this time for my master's degree. I read it in June because I had to read it for my exam session this summer. It did remind me a little bit of Gabriel Garcia Marquez and other writers that I cannot think of right now. It's an absolutely enchanting novel, in my opinion. We follow the development and the process of maturization of the main character, whose name I don't remember. Whoa, my memory. Anyway, we have this little child who grows up. He has a very special connection with a curandera whose name is Ultima, and this book explores the connection between Christianity and paganism, because Ultima, she does believe in God and she is very religious, but at the same time she is considered kind of a witch. She has all sorts of spells that help cure people from curses. I found it very, very endearing, very beautiful, and I really loved the writing style. Just flowed very nicely, and I really loved how well the author managed to weave reality with fantastic elements. So definitely would recommend. Now let's see what people who didn't enjoy this book have to say about it. First review is a bit longer, but bear with me. I hate this book. It is my least favorite book of all time. Florence was the only character I liked. I hated Ultima and thought she was very hypocritical. The characters were also flat, the writing was inconsistent, major plot holes abound, and the lengthy descriptions of the landscapes were wholly unnecessary and way too flowery, which is rare for me to say. I would like to check this book at the zombies. Can I check this book at the zombies? Thanks. I respectfully disagree with this reviewer. I wouldn't call the characters flat there, but they definitely lack maybe the roundness that we are used to when it comes to, let's say, modern pieces of writing, because they don't do anything unexpected. Like, you don't have the good character who does something bad or the bad character who does something good. They are all kind of a type of person, like the loving mother, the strong-willed father, and so on. For me, that wasn't a downside, because I also think we get to see this world from the point of view of a child. So a child who is 7, and he has a pretty reductionist view of the world. And if you think about when you are a child, you think of people as in good or bad, so you cannot really see all the complexity. And I think this is one reason maybe why the author chose to build his characters like this. But I also think it fits the style, in my opinion. And about Ultima being hypocritical, I'm not sure what that is about. Maybe because she condemns spells and curses while she does the same thing. That's the thing about her. She kind of lives outside morality, or outside the collective morality. She has her own moral compass that guides her. That's why she's not fully Christian, because you could argue Christianity wouldn't agree with some of her practices. So that definitely doesn't make her a flat character. Let's read one more review because this video gets very long and I haven't even gotten to Dostoevsky yet. The next review says, I'm not loving this book yet and I just encountered the F word. I'm debating whether to finish it or not. Any opinions? And then the person says, okay, I kept reading even though I found little enjoyment. I don't know why. When I encountered the F word again, I tossed it. Don't read it. I'm not sure what this person means by the F word. Is this word? Because I don't know what the problem is if you encounter it in a book. I mean, yes, it can be overused, but in this case, you do get to see some people that are a bit more, I would say, peasant. In my in my language, that doesn't make sense. In English, sounds a bit ugly. But yes, people who are chiseled, maybe. So there are some situations where it makes sense to curse. So I think not liking a book just because it contains curse words. Curse words are part of language. Books play a lot with language. Personally, I didn't make note of this word, but even if the author used it, he didn't do it just for the shock value. It made sense in that scene to use that word, in my opinion. Next book I want to talk about is The Plague by Camus. I could have also chosen Sisyphus myth or The Stranger, but I chose this because I enjoyed this the most. I read The Plague around when the pandemic started, so I think it was helpful. Again, it was quite a few while back when I read it, so I don't remember a lot from it. But I do like Camus' philosophy, which of course is illustrated in all of his writings. Let's read some one-star reviews, and maybe that will make me remember things from the novel. This person says, tedious. I think I'd rather have The Plague than read this again. Well, you don't have to read it again. Tedious? Yes, from what I remember, it wasn't the easiest read, but then again, I think not all books are meant to be easy to read. This review is very funny. They say, Heavy-handed and existentialist. I wish the rat had been taller and had more personality. Well, yes, it is existentialist, although Camus wouldn't call himself an existentialist. People say that he is very much an existentialist, so naturally his work is also existential. I read another review that said Camus should learn that women exist. Indeed, he doesn't really have female characters. He focuses more on the male ones. I still think you can get a lot out of these characters. Definitely something that you can discuss, you can notice, you can criticize. But I don't think that necessarily takes away from the value of a novel. Let's read one more review. So hard to read. So incredibly boring. I am sorry. I got to a point where I really struggled to keep focused on the story. For me, it can be summed up like this. They start to get suspicious something is not quite well. They then acknowledge it is something. They then set measures to minimize it. The town lives with it. And at last the plague goes away. It's mostly describing and discussing points of view, which again I found very hard to follow. It didn't work for me at all. I don't disagree with this reviewer. I think he's very right, but this is exactly what I liked about this novel. Yes, it's not extraordinary. Doesn't have a mind-blowing plot twist. It can be tedious to follow. But you could also say that reflects the feeling of a pandemic, and maybe people that maybe now that we have gone through this period of a pandemic, we can get that feeling of time going by very slowly because you don't know what happens, you don't know what people will do. You're kind of scared, but again, maybe you're annoyed at how authorities deal with it. So I wouldn't say this is necessarily a bad review because it does describe the book very well. If you don't like it, that's understandable. But this is quite exactly why I liked it, because you have this event, and you get to see normal people trying to go about their life and dealing with this situation. So there's nothing extraordinary, but that's exactly what I enjoyed about this novel. Two novels left. I left the best for last. I'm starting to get tired, but the last two novels are both written by Dostoevsky, which I mentioned is one of my favorite authors. And yeah, if this list wasn't in any particular order, I would put Dostoevsky at the top of my list. It's like those bands that you discover in when you're a teenager, and even if you find other bands that you like more, or maybe you resonate with more, that band that you discovered in your adolescence still has a special place in your heart. This is Dostoevsky for me. And I'll talk about two of his novels that I really enjoyed. The first one being Crime and Punishment. This is the Romanian version, and it's an older book, so I bought it secondhand. I didn't do this damage to this book, but it's still in pretty good shape. It's very readable. This is the first novel I read by Dostoevsky. I remember I was, I think, 16. I wanted to read something, and I've heard this name. Oh, this was such a great writer. It sounded very interesting. And I said, well, I don't care what people say about it. Difficult, easy. I'll just start to read it. If I can't deal with it, then I just read something else. But I was very surprised when this book really captivated me. I expected it to be because we all get this idea about classics that they have long, boring descriptions and they are hard to follow and they use a lot of pompous words that you don't really understand. And I kind of expected that from someone whose name is Dostoevsky. But I would say that that cannot be further from the truth. Dostoevsky can go on a lot of tangents that can be difficult to follow, and I definitely think this is an author who requires a lot of patience. Not only because his books are thick, generally speaking, but also because he tackles a lot of heavy subjects that you really need to process. In my experience, after I read the Dostoevsky book, I need like a week without reading anything and just me processing what I read because it's very heavy. Crime and Punishment is a more accessible Dostoevsky novel, in my opinion, and I think it's a good start. And even at 16, I don't pretend that, oh, I was such a genius, I read Dostoevsky and I understood everything. There were a lot of things in this novel that went over my head, but even at 16, I still liked it and I still thoroughly enjoyed it. And I had this feeling as I was reading it that, wow, this is how it feels like to be a great author. Maybe it was induced. Reading this book for the first time, it was almost like me standing in front of greatness. I reread Crime and Punishment last year, and I plan to reread Brothers Karamazov, which is the next book I'll talk about. I plan to reread that and do a video about him. Okay, but now let's read some one-star reviews from people who disagree with me. I feel like I read this before, but this review says, writing this was a crime and reading it was a punishment. Well, I don't know about reading it as a punishment. Maybe it is if you don't like it. But it being a crime writing it, I don't think so. I think this book illustrates the struggle of people. For me, what Dostoevsky did is it really made me realize how nuanced the world is, because he has a lot of characters that sometimes are despicable, but then he makes you kind of understand their position. He doesn't give excuses. It's not like you understand why he's a criminal and you excuse him for that, but he truly makes you be in that person's shoes and understand how a person could be driven to do these sorts of things. And I think that is what's so amazing about Dostoevsky, and that is what can make his literature difficult to read, because his characters are miserable. All of them are miserable. If you read this, you yourself will be miserable. Definitely in the break, and need to read something that's a bit more peaceful after Dostoevsky book. But yes, I don't think it's a crime. I think he blessed this world without being dramatic, proving that women can also be dramatic. I think he blessed this world with his writing. Let's see another review. DNF, I got over 100 pages in. I think I was chapter 2 into part 2 and realized I just wanted to have this book read and didn't actually care about what was going on in it. The problem I often find with these old books is that they contain a lot of detail about most everything in a scene, so any important detail is lost. Everything is equally important, so nothing is. I didn't care much about Raskolnikov as a protagonist. He was honestly really annoying, and even his strange plan didn't entice me to read or to learn why he'd done it and what would happen next. I don't think I agree. If he gives details, it's just to build the scene, to put you into that atmosphere. He really likes to delve into the psychology of all of his characters. So yes, Raskolnikov is the protagonist, but there are a lot of other characters that I would say are equally as developed. So that's why I said he's an author that requires a lot of patience, because there's a lot of things to take in, and you cannot just breeze through the novel and just find out what happens at the end. Usually what happens at the end, that's not really important. It's how people get there and what are characters' motivations. But if you don't care about that you wouldn't care about the novel either. One more review. I don't like this book. It was too long and people had weird thoughts and actions. Too much mental illness and suicides. Russians are strange and Russian literature is stranger. I think propaganda wrote it so people wouldn't do crime. That's a bit funny. Well, yes, Dostoevsky's books are full of mental illness, but that's because he struggled with a lot of mental illness, and that's why I say it's good to take a break after you read Dostoevsky novel, because it can really affect you mentally and emotionally. But on the other hand, I think that's the beauty of it. Last novel I want to talk about is Brothers Karamazov. Critics say this is Dostoevsky's best novel, and I do tend to agree with them because it's most philosophical. I read it about 7, I want to say, or 6 years ago, so I don't remember a lot of it. It follows the story of three brothers that each go through their own struggles. It talks about religion and how can one believe in God when such awful things happen in the world. I would like to speak more about it, but again, I don't remember it. When I reread it, because I do want to reread it with my more mature brain, I will do a review about it, and I will talk more in depth. If you feel like you're experienced and if you feel like you don't need an introduction to Dostoevsky, or maybe you've read Crime and Punishment, I definitely recommend Brothers Karamazov. That is very long. My edition had 2 volumes, which was each about 500 or 600 pages. So it's very long. It's definitely a book that you need to be very patient with. It follows a lot of characters, but in my opinion, it's genius and definitely worth reading, especially if you have questions about religion. I know Dostoevsky, he was a believer. Maybe people will disagree with me, but I never got the feeling from him that he pushes religion, because he very much had doubts about God, even if he ultimately get to kind of to accept it and to become a believer. That process of doubting, I think a lot of people can empathize with it, no matter if you're a believer or not. Let's read some one-star reviews. This person just says, "Fuck Dostoevsky." If Dostoevsky is an author that was pushed down your throat, I can understand that, and it pains me to see so many great authors being pushed down students' throat by their teachers. The other person says, "Literally traumatizing, not a slay. Nobody told Dostoevsky to shut the fuck up," and it shows. That's funny. Well, he was a white male, so he was very privileged from that point of view. Traumatizing, yes, definitely. You, that's why I said his books can be triggering. But then again, one could argue that living is traumatizing. Life comes with a lot of awful things that can happen to you. And you could argue that Dostoevsky's book prepare you for that. I like this review. "The torture has come to an end. This book is a 5 and a 1. It was amazing and I did not like it at all." His books are meant to be difficult, not necessarily difficult to read, but difficult to process. They are meant to, I wouldn't say traumatize you, but they are definitely meant to impact you. Yes, everyone is miserable in his novels, everybody's suffering, and that is quite dramatic. But then again, his life was full of suffering as well. So he definitely, I think, he reflected his life experience onto his writing, which is what writers do, right? I do agree with it. I wouldn't say it's torture reading it, but it's definitely not the easiest thing to do. Last review, I'll read it, although I don't have a good argument for it. "A Christian love fest with none of Tolstoy's literary depth. The characters are caricatures, paper cutout approximations of people. It would be comical if it wasn't written in such earnest. A pathetic book, nothing but Christian propaganda veiled by a thin veneer of expansive worldviews." Well, I wouldn't call it Christian propaganda. Again, Dostoevsky, he was definitely a believer, so I think it's understandable that he expressed this in his novel. I'm not a believer. I would call myself an atheist, agnostic. I don't know exactly, but definitely I'm not a Christian. And I love Dostoevsky. I read him, and I wouldn't say he convinced me to become a Christian. I can see where he's coming from. People who have difficult lives are more likely to turn to God, and I think that is Dostoevsky's case as well. I wouldn't say characters are caricatures. You definitely have those characters that are just Marvel villains, if you want. They are just bad, and that's it. But there are also a lot of characters that are very complex and that you want to love, but at the same time you hate. So again, respectfully disagree. This was everything after a very long video. This was my list of 7 books that I really love, my all-time favorites. There are other pieces of writing that I could have added to this list, but I thought 7 is a good number. And I really enjoyed reading one-star reviews. I don't take them personally. I just find it funny, and I also find it interesting how something that people hate is what I love about that novel. So it's very interesting how complex we are as people. As you notice, these are all classics, or what could be considered classics, because that's what I like to read. I prefer reading authors that are dead. I don't know why. It's just my preference is what I gravitate towards. Hopefully, my next video will be either about Virginia Woolf or about Alice Walker. We'll see. In the meantime, if you stuck to the end and if you didn't get bored, thank you for watching. Maybe tell me what's your favorite, or what do you think about the novels I talked about. You can be as brutal as you want. Again, I won't take it personally. I can understand that we have different opinions, and maybe the reason why I love a book is the reason why you hate it, which I find fascinating. This was my list. Thank you for watching, and hopefully I'll see you in the next one. Bye.